Now you know I'ma change your life. Just put your hands in the air.
What's up, Kansas City? I'm your host, Glenn Brian Frizzell. Thank you for joining us for part 2 of our interview with Mrs. Mamie Hughes Rodgers. I'd like to just jump right in and ask you to tell us a little bit about what you think regarding the Black Lives Matters movement that has kind of centered around one topic, not just one topic, but one topic in particular, police brutality.
Police brutality did not just begin. And there have been many ways that there was brutality, but nobody could know about it but the police who were guilty. And now that we have videos, we have pictures that show this, it is quite different, and it portrays that which has occurred and allows people who believe in freedom and justice to speak about it and to say that it matters. Life people matter, and we want the world to know that we are not being treated right, and we want you to know and understand what we believe is right.
Now, in a May 1976 interview, I hope I'm not going back too far, Mrs. Hughes Rodgers with Edward Scott, you said that you were bothered by black-on-black crime. You said, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, it was a myth that we thought we could close our eyes, it would all go away. We usually say the system is at fault, and that causes us first to look at our situation and blame those closest around us. And that's not healthy. I just want to ask you, is it our responsibility to protest police brutality, to protest unjust relations in our communities?
Yes, it is our responsibility. It's our responsibility to speak out. But at the same time, it is our responsibility to talk about black-on-black crime. Mm-hmm. That cannot be right, and we can't let it be used for an excuse for there to be police brutality.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to move on to health care and ask you to reflect on being close to Dr. Samuel Rodgers, who was your second husband. He served for more than 30 years, Dr. Rodgers, as an executive director of the Kansas City Health Clinic that today bears his name. And before that, he joined with white doctors to further training for blacks. Correct me if I'm wrong, I read that Rodgers and 3 other black doctors created the first black private medical practice in Kansas City?
Right. There is a white doctor who needs to have his name put out to be proclaimed. His name was Hale Woodruff. And Dr. Rodgers...
How do you spell that?
Gainey.
Okay.
And Dr. Rodgers had great respect for Hale Woodruff. And I'd like to go back to the fact that once upon a time, there were 2 public hospitals here. General Hospital number 1, which was for white people, General Hospital number 2, which was for blacks. Mm-hmm. Now, Dr. Sam Rodgers, Dr. Peterson, Carl Peterson, W.R. Peterson, Dr. Ramos, Dr. Williams, several of the black doctors were there, but they at General number 2. But they were all general practitioners. When Dr. Ramos came, he was, I think, already trained as a radiologist. But the people who supervised them, who were the overseers of everything they did, were the white doctors who came from General number 1. And the reason Dr. Rodgers respected and felt so good about Hale Woodruff, because he was the first one to say, these doctors need to be trained, these doctors can be trained, and they became radiologists, surgeons, And finally, Dr. Rodgers loved to say, well, there wasn't anything left, so they gave me OBGYN. But in 1988, when they renamed Samuel U. Rodgers Health Center, it was more than clinic, named Health Center in his honor, Dr. Samuel U. Rodgers Community Health Center. They eventually dropped the community. But they had buttons printed that said Dr. Rodgers delivered me. They had 3,000 buttons printed, and there were people who said to me, what happened? They ran out of pens. So we thought that was pretty funny.
Now, the health center opened in 1988. I assume it was a labor of love. Not open, excuse me, it was renamed after Samuel Rodgers in 1988. I remember I was a third grader at that time in Miss Filka's third grade St. Teresa Little Flowers class. I remember Lucille Bluford Library opened around that same time. Was that a labor of love, getting that center renamed and up to standard to make sure that it reflected his vision and continues to reflect his vision?
It was certainly just a wonderful thing for him, but it was what it had been from the first time they opened the doors.
Amazing.
And he was there. For instance, he was adamant about those doors being open. If somebody comes to that door, they get let in. Nobody gets turned away. And he was the executive director, but also the medical director. And he never got paid but one salary.
That is just awesome. The amount of sacrifice and labor that Dr. Rodgers put into his vision. I wanted to ask you in terms of relating to today, President Obama's affordable health care. Are you an advocate for that?
I am a strong advocate for it. And we have more people now insured than we did before we had an Affordable Care Act, Health Care Act. Now, the reason there are not more people insured is the governors of many states who have refused the money for Medicaid. And that has been a horrendous no-no and disadvantage for people who deserve it.
Thank you for sharing candidly there with us, Mrs. Hughes Rodgers. I'd like to move on now. If any point, we're getting to the third part of our interview, if any point where you feel that I've left something out or that we need to know something that is not on the list, just feel free to interject. We're going to kind of have we call it freestyle unity session here. This part of the interview is about your connection with historically black colleges and universities. Are HBCUs important black colleges still today?
They are as important today as they were in 1966. Now, black colleges do not deny admittance to whites. There is diversity in every one of those colleges, but they need to know about our history. And that history is there. And when I talk about Fisk University, I love to talk about Jubilee singers who went out, who sang, who went abroad, who went around this nation to get funding for Fisk University, along with that which had been given by the white people who felt that it was important for these freed slaves to be educated.
And that is a very important part of the Fisk story. I've heard it many times, and every time I hear it, I'm just amazed about how passionate Fisk alumni are in retelling that. Now, I'd like to say that your son, Sean, one of your many children is a Fisk alum. Your parents, we stated...
All 5 of my children.
Well, see, I wasn't going to go on that ledge there, but all 5, that is certainly an accomplishment. Your parents, we stated, were FAMU alums, and your second husband, Dr. Rodgers, was a Howard University alum. That's just awesome. We'd like to talk talk to you a little bit about your connection to the Nelson Atkins mural paintings, the traveling paintings involved with Hale Woodruff, excuse me. They're also at the American Jazz Museum and the Black Archives. Dr. Mamie Rodgers was also a graduate of Talladega College, where
Yes.
Hale Woodruff originated. Can you talk a little bit about
Well, not where he originated, but where in 1938 he was commissioned to paint those murals.
He painted
the
the Amistad
Amistad,
Unity
right.
murals between
But he
38
had
and 42
done
for the
work
library.
long before 1938. Of course, that's when they knew about him. But I would like to say to you, when we talk about the Nelson, in 1966, I was one of a small group of women, black women, who met with Ted Coe, who was the director, and we talked about the fact that there was no black art. There were no black artists whose works were shown. And it was almost like, what, are you wasting my time telling me something like this? And we call names like Hale Woodruff, Jacob Lawrence, Aaron Douglas, and
Romeo
we went
Bearden?
through, yes. And it was sort of like, who are they? Now, I may be exaggerating a bit, but it took a while, and perhaps it was, I don't know if it was getting black women on the board that did it, or that it had begun, and then that is why they said we need to also include black people as members of the board. But when we heard that the murals from Talladega had traveled around the country and were going to be in Kansas City, that was an exciting thing for us, for our family, the Hughes family, because Hale Woodruff's wife was my children's grandmother's sister. And we called him Uncle Hale. His wife was my former aunt and aunt-in-law. But the family, we knew that the family have his works. And just starting with us, because he had done a charcoal for Leonard Hughes, and it said to Leonard Hughes, 1961, Hale Woodruff. And so there were other things that Hale Woodruff had done with and for the city that we felt the Nelson just has the murals. But it would be a wonderful thing if we could have an enlargement of that. We could talk about the other, or talk about and have shown that which Uncle Hale also did. Down at the American Jazz Museum in the Changing Gallery, the very first exhibit that you see when you walk in is a wall. And people sort of, when I have been down there, look at me, what kind of something is that, a wall? And I say that Uncle Hale knew that his father-in-law was a poet, and he had done a poem about Lake Placid. Now, Uncle Hale knew that Grandpa Barker not only wrote that poem, but quite a number of poems that were now housed at KU, at Kansas University. And so when he was one time at Lake Placid, which was and is a black resort in Missouri, and had been started by a black physician in 1934. Now, Uncle Hale painted that poem on the wall, which you'll see, but there was a door to leading into the cabin, because that was a wall on the front porch, or on a porch. Mamie Hughes called it a sleeping porch. But the door led into the house, into the living room, and on that glass, oil-on glass, was a painting. I was there when he did that work, and he said, "Mamie, this is life." So some of the things he did were abstract, as was the charcoal for Leonard. But then there is a painting there, a portrait of Gladys Beddoe, who was a friend of his wife. There is also a painting of his sister-in-law that is not on display there, but which I guess Sean's cousins who own it could have taken a picture maybe, but they didn't, and it's all right because we have other works that would not have been at the Nelson, but people who have seen it at the Nelson, seen the murals at the Nelson, and learned that there was this additional work, have been happy and pleased, and they have come over to visit and have talked about the additional work that they think was worth the trouble that Sean had gone to.
So Mr. Hale Woodruff was also a poet. Mrs. Hughes Rodgers?
He was not the poet. His father-in-law was the poet.
His father-in-law wrote Lake Placid.
Yes, his father-in-law wrote that poem, Lake Placid, which is what Uncle Hale painted on that wall, and which is shown there on the wall in the American Jazz Museum.
Now, Mrs. Hughes Rodgers, you mentioned father-in-laws, cousins, sons. It's awesome, I think, to not have only gone to a HBCU, but to have that family-steeped culture, and where you can just mention family members and tell stories and just be connected through art. I think that's awesome.
I love to talk about Aaron Douglas as a famous artist. I took a class at Fisk University that Aaron Douglas was professor. I'm not too sure that I did too well in art appreciation, but it was fine to know that these people who now are well known and are famous were at places like Howard University, Spelman, Talladega, Tuskegee, Fisk, you name them.
Now, well, Ms. Hughes Rodgers, we appreciate you here today. What's up, Kansas City? We are going to pause and come back for our final component of this interview with Mrs. Mamie Hughes Rodgers.
Now, remind me, because I can't, the college in Houston, Texas, Texas Southern, isn't that the black college?
Texas Southern is in Houston, yeah.
And why couldn't I, just when I was thinking about talking to you, I said, because my cousin taught music there for 30 years.
Awesome.
And there is a building, the, oh God, I see in the name, the Stewart, is it Stuart Cheney, but a building with the name of Cousin Ruth and her colleague. And the two of them taught at Texas U for many years, taught music.
Now, do you think music is a skill that's born into you, or something that you learn and refine?
Pardon?
Is music a skill that, or a gift? Are you born with musically inclined, or something you can learn later on?
Well, music was something that, as a youngster, I was exposed to. My grandfather had a violin, and I'm not sure if that's what I inherited, but as a preteen, I took violin lessons. We had a small group and went from house to house with those lessons.
I'm IFBB Bikini Pro Cat Williams, and when I'm not working out in the gym, I'm searching the web on Cascade Media and What's Up Kansas City. So make sure you check them out.